The bold challenge. In the vast emptiness of space, silence ruled the stars. But on one planet, within a fleet of ships, the calm was about to be shattered. The alien fleet had been traveling for weeks, preparing for a grand conquest. Their mission was simple: invade a weak and unprepared system. They had done it before, and this time would be no different. The fleet was led by General Zoreth, a ruthless leader known for his sharp mind and brutal tactics. Under his command, the alien ships were sleek, advanced, and deadly. They were confident. No enemy had ever stood a chance against them. The enemy always cowered before them. The aliens had invaded and destroyed countless worlds, and their power had only grown stronger. But the humans, the creatures of the death worlds, had always stayed far from their radar. Until now. One day, while the fleet was making its way through the dark void of space, a mysterious signal was picked up. It was faint, but enough to catch the attention of the fleet's top commanders. The distress call. At first, it seemed like just another warning of some insignificant problem. But as the signal grew stronger, the commanders realized this wasn't just any distress signal. It was from a fleet that had been destroyed, asking for help from a force that could not possibly be challenged. General Zoreth, intrigued by the sudden appearance of this signal, demanded to know more. His officers quickly deciphered the message. It was brief, to the point, and filled with desperation. "We have been outmatched. We need assistance. The Deathworlder fleet has arrived." Deathworlders. The very mention of this name sent a chill through Zoreth's body. The Deathworlders were a terrifying force. Not many had encountered them, but stories of their brutal combat and ruthless tactics were whispered across the galaxy. The aliens had long thought the Deathworlders were just a myth, a story told by weaker species to scare their children. Now, Zoreth was faced with the harsh reality. These Deathworlders were real, and they were deadly. Zoreth felt a momentary flicker of doubt, but he quickly pushed it aside. He had led his fleet through countless battles, and none had been difficult. The Deathworlders might be fearsome, but they were just another enemy. Zoreth was sure of it. He had the most advanced fleet in the galaxy. What could they possibly do to stop him? The decision was made. Zoreth would ignore the warnings. His fleet would press forward and crush whatever force had the audacity to challenge them. He wasn't just going to ignore the distress call, he was going to answer it with overwhelming force. His fleet would show the Deathworlders that no one, not even they, could stand against the might of the alien empire. Zoreth's confidence grew with every passing moment. His officers agreed with him. They had the numbers, the firepower, and the experience to crush anything in their path. The fleet would engage the Deathworlders head-on. There was no other choice. It would be the perfect test of their superiority. "We will destroy them," Zoreth declared to his officers. "We will send a message that will be heard across the stars. Let the Deathworlders come. They will regret ever crossing our path." The fleet continued to move forward, undeterred by the warnings. The distress signal faded into the background as the alien ships prepared for battle. Each ship was armed to the teeth, its weapons ready to unleash destruction. The alien fleet was a force of nature, unstoppable in their eyes. But there was one thing Zoreth had not considered. He hadn't accounted for the unpredictability of the Deathworlders. He had no idea what he was about to face. As the fleet neared the coordinates of the distress call, a strange tension filled the air. Zoreth stood at the bridge, his hands clasped behind his back, his gaze fixed on the view ahead. His officers watched him closely, sensing his confidence. The stars in front of them seemed to grow darker, and a sudden chill swept through the ship. Zoreth didn't notice it. He was too focused on the battle ahead. But deep down, a small part of him wondered if they were making a grave mistake. The aliens were so sure of their victory. They had no idea what they were walking into. And as they moved closer to the unknown, the Deathworlders, those terrifying creatures, watched, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Zoreth's fleet was about to face the fight of their lives, and they had no idea what kind of enemy awaited them. The moment of truth was fast approaching. Would the Deathworlders live up to their reputation, or would they be just another story in the galaxy's long history of battles? Only time would tell, and the answer would come soon enough. The deadly encounter. As the alien fleet advanced deeper into space, the tension aboard the ships grew. General Zorath stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the empty void ahead. His fleet was vast, the ships gliding silently through the dark expanse. He had faced many enemies in his time, but something felt different now. He could sense a change in the air, an unspoken weight pressing down on everyone around him. The fleet had followed the distress signal for days, and they were getting closer. Every report from his officers confirmed that they were nearing the coordinates. However, the closer they got, the more uneasy the crew became. It wasn't fear, but something else, something unknown. The Deathworlders had been described as savage and brutal, but there was no clear picture of what to expect. Zorath's mind raced, but his resolve stayed strong. He had led his people to victory countless times, and this would be no different. "I want eyes on every ship," Zorath ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "We're approaching the target. Be alert." His officers nodded and began scanning the surrounding space, their eyes darting across the starred expanse. Time seemed to slow as they waited for any sign of the Deathworlder fleet. It was then that a strange signal began to pulse on the radar. A warning light flashed red. It wasn't a ship or a signal, but a strange distortion, something they had never encountered before. "What is it?" one of the officers asked, a hint of uncertainty creeping into their voice. "It's them," Zorath replied, his voice steady. "The Deathworlders. They're here." The alien fleet immediately went into full alert. Ships powered up their weapons, and soldiers took their positions, ready for whatever came next. Zorath gripped the railing tightly, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the void. Suddenly, the quiet space was shattered. A massive shadow appeared in the distance, one that was far larger than anything the aliens had ever encountered. The fleet's sensors struggled to identify the object, but they could make out its shape. A hulking mass of warships, a wall of metal and firepower, far more imposing than anything the aliens had ever seen. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived. Zorath's heart skipped a beat. He had heard of their fearsome reputation, but nothing could have prepared him for this moment. The Deathworlder ships were unlike anything the aliens had ever faced. They were crude and primitive in their design, but there was an overwhelming power to them. These ships looked like they had been built with sheer force and violence in mind. Brutal, raw, and deadly. "Prepare for battle," Zorath shouted. "All ships, open fire." But before his command could be fully carried out, a strange and terrifying thing happened. The Deathworlder fleet didn't engage with the alien ships immediately. Instead, the massive warships opened fire first. A series of blinding flashes erupted from the Deathworlder ships, sending shockwaves through space. The alien fleet was caught off guard as beams of energy tore through their lines. The first few shots were devastating. Alien ships began to disintegrate before they could even raise their shields. The sheer power of the Deathworlder weapons overwhelmed the aliens, and in seconds, the once mighty fleet began to fall apart. The Deathworlders didn't hesitate. They had no fear, no mercy. Zorath's eyes widened as the battle unfolded in front of him. His fleet, so confident just moments ago, was now in full retreat. The Deathworlders were relentless, their ships moving with terrifying precision. Zorath barked orders, trying to organize a counterattack, but it was clear the aliens were outmatched. They had been too cocky. They had underestimated their enemies. "We need to retreat. Pull back now," Zorath screamed, panic rising in his chest. But it was too late. The Deathworlder fleet was already closing in. Their ships were faster, more aggressive, and their firepower was beyond anything the alien fleet could handle. The Deathworlders were not only skilled in combat, but had an almost predatory instinct. They were the hunters, and Zoreth's fleet had just become the prey. Amid the chaos, a strange transmission crackled through the communication channels. It was a voice, deep and menacing, filled with a dark power. "You thought you could challenge us," the voice boomed. "You were wrong." The voice was unmistakable. It belonged to the leader of the Deathworlders, a being so terrifying that it sent shivers down Zoreth's spine. The Deathworlders had been watching. They had seen the alien fleet's arrogance and had waited for the perfect moment to strike. Now, that moment had arrived. Zoreth clenched his fists, rage and fear building within him. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He had come here to crush the Deathworlders, to show them their place. But now, his fleet was falling apart. His men were dying, and his pride was shattered. The Deathworlders had made their point. They were in control. The battle raged on, with the Deathworlders showing no mercy. Zoreth realized with growing horror that this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for dominance. And in that moment, he knew they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. As the last few alien ships attempted to escape, the Deathworlder fleet continued its relentless pursuit. The sky was filled with explosions, the sound of death echoing through the emptiness of space. The aliens had challenged the wrong fleet, and now they were paying the price. The unstoppable pursuit. As the alien ships desperately tried to escape, Zoreth watched in disbelief. His once mighty fleet, now shattered and broken, was no match for the Deathworlders. They had been too confident, too sure of their victory. Now, the harsh reality was settling in. They were being hunted. Zoreth stood on the bridge, his fists clenched at his sides. The images of his fleet's destruction filled the screens around him. Alien ships, once proud symbols of their power, were reduced to debris and flames. His heart pounded as he tried to think of a way to turn the tide. But the odds were clear. The Deathworlders were relentless. Their ships were faster, their weapons more devastating, and their strategies ruthless. "Report," Zoreth demanded, his voice cracking with the pressure. His communications officer turned to him, her face pale. "Sir, we've lost contact with the outer fleet. Several ships have been completely destroyed. The others are scattering in all directions. We can't track them all." Zoreth's gaze hardened. He couldn't afford to lose more ships. If they couldn't regroup and organize, they'd be wiped out entirely. "We can't let them get away. I want every ship to fall back to the central fleet. We'll make our stand there." "Prepare for counteroffensive," Zoreth ordered, his voice now steady despite the fear creeping into his mind. But before the command could even be sent, another explosion rocked the fleet. The sound of it reverberated through the ship's hull, sending vibrations through the floor and walls. A large section of the ship's outer defenses had been breached. Zoreth turned quickly to his communications officer. "Status: direct hit from a Deathworlder ship, sir. Shields are down to 40%. Weapon systems are still functional, but we're losing power," she replied, panic seeping into her voice. "We have no choice but to fight back. Deploy all remaining fighters," Zoreth commanded. He didn't know how much longer they could hold out, but they had to try. The fleet's few remaining fighter ships launched into the void, their weapons blazing as they collided with the Deathworlder ships. But their efforts were futile. The Deathworlder ships absorbed the blasts without flinching, retaliating with even more force. Zoreth's stomach churned as he watched his fleet being picked apart piece by piece. From the depths of space, a low rumble echoed. Zoreth's eyes darted to the view screen, and his heart dropped. A massive Deathworlder ship loomed in front of them, the flagship of the Deathworlder fleet. Its size was beyond anything Zoreth had imagined. It was like a towering beast, its dark silhouette blocking out the stars. It moved toward them with terrifying precision. Suddenly, a voice boomed through the ship's comm system. It was deep and cold, sending a chill down Zoreth's spine. "Your challenge was foolish," the voice said. "Now you will learn the cost of your arrogance." The voice was unmistakable. It belonged to the leader of the Deathworlders, a being whose mere presence sent fear into the hearts of those who had crossed paths with him. Zoreth's body tensed. He had heard stories of the Deathworlder leader's brutality, of how he had annihilated entire fleets with a single command. Now, Zoreth was facing him. As if on cue, the Deathworlder flagship unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. The alien ships in Zoreth's fleet had no chance. One by one, they were struck down, torn apart by the overwhelming firepower. The few ships that managed to survive the initial assault tried to flee, but they were quickly hunted down. Zoreth knew it was only a matter of time before his fleet was completely destroyed. His eyes darted across the bridge, looking for any hope, any chance to escape. But all he saw was the overwhelming power of the Deathworlders. His mind raced as he realized the grim truth. There was no escape. "Prepare for impact," Zoreth shouted, bracing himself for the final blow. But then, just as all seemed lost, something unexpected happened. A fleet of smaller ships, ships unlike anything the aliens had seen before, appeared from the shadows. They were sleek, agile, and appeared from nowhere. They swarmed around the Deathworlder flagship, distracting its weapons long enough for the remaining alien ships to retreat. Zoreth's heart skipped a beat as he saw the new fleet. They weren't Deathworlders, but they were just as deadly. They fired precisely, their shots hitting critical points on the Deathworlder flagship, causing it to stagger and momentarily lose its edge. "Who are they?" Zoreth muttered to himself, trying to comprehend the sudden turn of events. "They're not Deathworlders. These ships are different," his officer said, her voice filled with awe. The mysterious fleet continued to fire on the Deathworlder flagship, their coordinated strikes creating a diversion. The Deathworlders were momentarily distracted, but it was clear that the battle was far from over. Zoreth's fleet still faced an uphill battle, but now there was a glimmer of hope. Who were these mysterious ships, and what was their connection to the Deathworlder fleet? Zoreth couldn't say, but one thing was clear: they had arrived just in time. As Zoreth ordered his remaining fleet to regroup, he could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had been so sure of victory, so confident in his superiority. Now he was fighting for survival. And this mysterious new fleet could be the key to turning the tide. The battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: the Deathworlders had made a grave mistake by challenging the wrong fleet. And now Zoreth would learn just how deep the consequences of that mistake ran. The mysterious fleet. The battle raged on as Zoreth's fleet struggled to regain its footing. His ships, battered and broken, clung to what little hope remained. The Deathworlder flagship, still heavily engaged in combat with the mysterious fleet, appeared to be taking damage, but it wasn't enough. Zoreth could feel the pressure mounting. The mysterious fleet had intervened just in time, but for how long could they hold off the Deathworlders? Zoreth stared out the window, his mind racing. Who were these ships? They were unlike any fleet he had ever seen. Their sleek, sharp designs contrasted sharply with the brutish appearance of the Deathworlder ships, and their firepower. It was precision. Every shot seemed perfectly calculated, aimed at weak points in the enemy's defenses. It was unlike anything Zoreth had ever witnessed. "Sir, the mysterious fleet is holding their ground. But they can't keep this up forever," his officer said, voice tinged with worry. Zoreth nodded grimly. "I know. We need to regroup and prepare for a final strike, but we can't do it alone." Zoreth turned toward the communications officer, desperation creeping into his voice. "Open a channel to the mysterious fleet. I need to speak with their commander." The officer hesitated, glancing at the view screen. "We've tried, sir. They're not responding to our transmissions. It's as if they're intentionally blocking us." Zoreth cursed under his breath. He knew they couldn't afford to waste time. But the mysterious fleet was the only thing keeping the Deathworlders at bay. Without them, Zoreth knew his own fleet would be annihilated. He needed answers, and he needed them quickly. Suddenly, the view screen flickered, and a deep, booming voice filled the ship. Zorath's heart skipped a beat. "This is Commander Varric of the Deathworlder fleet," the voice announced, calm and calculated. "Your challenge was foolish, and now you will pay the price." Zorath clenched his fists. He had been expecting this. The Deathworlders never relented. But now, with the mysterious fleet on their side, he wasn't ready to give up just yet. "You're wrong, Commander Varric," Zorath shouted, his voice unwavering. "We've only just begun. And if you think you've won, you're mistaken. There are forces at play here that you don't understand." The voice on the comms chuckled, a cold, cruel sound. "You believe you've gained an advantage, Zorath. Do you think these mysterious ships will save you? They're nothing but a distraction." Zorath stood tall, his confidence growing despite the Deathworlders' taunts. "They're not a distraction. They're our allies, and you will soon learn that you've challenged the wrong fleet." The comms went silent for a moment, and then the screen flickered once more. The mysterious fleet's ships appeared on the view screen, their formations shifting to cover the remnants of Zorath's fleet. Their movements were synchronized, almost as if they were a single unified force. It was a sight that sent shivers down Zorath's spine. "They're preparing for something," Zorath muttered to himself, watching in awe as the mysterious fleet moved into position. The Deathworlders had been so focused on overpowering Zorath's fleet, they hadn't noticed the trap closing in around them. Now, the tables were slowly starting to turn. The mysterious fleet, with its advanced tactics and powerful weaponry, had begun to take control of the battle. Zorath quickly turned to his officer. "Are we ready? Can we strike?" The officer nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "Yes, sir. We can deploy the remaining weapons. If we strike now, we may have a chance." Zorath hesitated for a moment. He couldn't believe this was happening. The Deathworlders were strong, ruthless, and relentless. They had wiped out entire fleets before. But now, with the mysterious fleet by their side, there was a glimmer of hope. He could feel the shift in the air. The tide of the battle was turning. He spoke slowly, his words full of determination. "We strike now, with everything we have. Show the Deathworlders that they made a grave mistake." The officer activated the fleet's remaining weapons, and the final desperate assault began. Outside the ship, Zorath watched as beams of energy shot from the remaining ships, striking the Deathworlder fleet with devastating force. The Deathworlders retaliated, but the mysterious fleet countered every move. It was a relentless, brutal dance, and for the first time, Zorath saw hope. The Deathworlder flagship reeled from the impact, its massive hull flickering with energy surges. The Deathworlder fleet, though still powerful, was beginning to falter under the combined might of Zorath's fleet and their mysterious allies. Zorath's heart raced. Could they really win this battle? Could they actually defeat the Deathworlders? He didn't know yet, but for the first time since the battle began, he felt a flicker of hope. The mysterious fleet wasn't just a distraction. They were the key to victory. And Zorath knew they had to win, not just for his fleet, but for the future of their entire race. The battle was far from over, but the Deathworlders were beginning to realize that they had underestimated their opponents, both the aliens and the mysterious fleet. The tides of war were shifting, and Zorath knew they had a chance to turn the battle in their favor. The turn of the tide. The battle between Zorath's fleet, the mysterious ships, and the overwhelming Deathworlder force had reached a critical moment. The silence that had fallen in the command center of Zorath's ship was almost suffocating, broken only by the sharp beeps of consoles and the low hum of the engines. For the first time since the fight had begun, Zorath's mind was clear. The Deathworlders were faltering. Its ships, though battered and weakened, were holding their ground, thanks to the unexpected intervention of the mysterious fleet. These unknown allies had turned the battlefield into a deadly dance, coordinating their movements with deadly precision. It was a sight unlike any Zorath had ever seen, a tactical brilliance that seemed almost too perfect to be real. But even with this newfound advantage, Zorath knew it wasn't over. The Deathworlder fleet was still formidable, and they would never give up without a fight. As much as he wanted to believe victory was within their grasp, he knew the real test had just begun. The Deathworlders, ruthless and unyielding, would strike back with everything they had. "Sir, the Deathworlder flagship is retreating into the deeper formation," one of Zorath's officers shouted from the tactical station, eyes wide with shock. "They're pulling back, reorganizing." Zorath's eyes narrowed. The Deathworlders weren't retreating out of fear. They were regrouping for a final, devastating blow. He had seen this before. They would make one last push, and this time, they would do whatever it took to break their enemies. The view screen flickered with images of the Deathworlder fleet, their ships still formidable despite the damage they had sustained. The flagship, massive and imposing, was the heart of their forces. But Zorath noticed something else, something unsettling. Behind the flagship, another wave of ships was emerging, far more advanced than the ones they had fought so far. "They have reinforcements," Zorath muttered under his breath, a sense of dread creeping into his chest. His heart raced as the battle escalated. The mysterious fleet, though impressive, had not prepared for this. Zorath turned to his officer. "Can we hold them off? Can we strike before they regroup?" he asked, his voice tight with urgency. His officer swallowed hard, her fingers flying over the control panels. "We have the advantage, sir, but it won't last long. We'll need to deploy everything we've got." Zorath clenched his fists. His fleet was weakened, and even with the mysterious ships by their side, there were limits to what they could do. He glanced at the view screen again, where the new Deathworlder ships were closing in. This was the final confrontation. There was no room for hesitation. Zorath knew they had to act quickly. "Tell the mysterious fleet to prepare for a coordinated strike," Zorath commanded. "We take down their reinforcements now, or we will lose this battle." As the officers worked furiously to relay the orders, Zorath stood at the center of the command room, staring at the chaotic scene unfolding before him. The mysterious fleet was already moving into position, their ships shifting in perfect formation, ready to join the final assault. The tension in the room was unbearable. For the first time, the mysterious fleet appeared vulnerable, their ships now fully engaged with the Deathworlders. Zorath could feel his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, their final chance to strike before the Deathworlders regained their momentum. "Fire!" Zorath shouted, his voice sharp and commanding. He had no choice but to rely on everything his fleet had left. The mysterious ships responded instantly, unleashing a barrage of devastating firepower that tore through the Deathworlder reinforcements. The space between the two fleets became a whirl of bright flashes, laser beams, and explosions. Zorath's ships surged forward, coordinating with the mysterious fleet in a way that felt almost instinctive. Together, they attacked the incoming Deathworlder ships with everything they had, exploiting every weakness they could find. But even as the battle raged on, Zorath could sense that the Deathworlders weren't giving up. Their flagship, surrounded by a force of fierce reinforcements, had pushed into the heart of the battle. Zorath knew that they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for the future of their people. "Commander," an officer cried out, fear creeping into their voice. "We've lost contact with several of our ships. The Deathworlder flagship is getting closer. They're preparing for a massive counterattack." Zorath's eyes narrowed, the weight of the moment settling heavily on his shoulders. His heart told him that they had the upper hand, but his experience told him to expect the worst. The Deathworlders were masters of war, and they would never back down without a final devastating fight. "They're getting desperate," Zorath muttered, his mind racing. "We need to keep the pressure on them. Don't let up." With every passing moment, the Deathworlder flagship drew closer, its massive guns primed and ready to strike. Zorath's fleet was running low on ammunition, and even the mysterious ships were showing signs of strain. The Deathworlders were relentless, and if they couldn't break their offensive, it would be all over. Zorath clenched his jaw, determination flashing in his eyes. "We hold the line. We don't let them escape with this victory." The battle continued, the fates of two fleets hanging in the balance. The final push. The battle had escalated into chaos. Zoreth's fleet, though strong and resourceful, had taken heavy hits. Ships burned in the cold of space, their hulls cracked and glowing from the intensity of the explosions. The mysterious fleet, now deeply involved in the fray, was not faring much better. Their sleek, advanced ships shimmered as they dodged blasts and returned fire, but the Deathworlders had thrown everything they had into this final counterattack. Zoreth stood rigid in the command room, his eyes locked onto the view screen where the Deathworlder flagship loomed closer. His heart raced, and his mind flashed with images of his fleet's destruction, but he refused to show weakness. He knew that the only way to win now was to push harder, to dig deeper into the reserves of strength they still had. "Commander Zoreth," one of his officers shouted over the comms. "The Deathworlder flagship is charging weapons. They're preparing for a massive strike." Zoreth's eyes narrowed. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting to win, to annihilate them once and for all. But he would not let that happen. This was his fleet's last stand, and he would not go down without everything he had. "Deploy all remaining ships to intercept their fire," Zoreth barked. "We can't let them unleash that blast on us." He turned to the officer next to him, who had a fearful look in their eyes. "Tell the mysterious fleet to concentrate their fire on the flagship. We need to cripple their weapons now." As the officer relayed the orders, Zoreth watched as the mysterious ships adjusted their position, forming a tight formation. Their guns lit up with terrifying force, a barrage of plasma and energy blasts shooting toward the Deathworlder flagship. The Deathworlders were skilled, but Zoreth could feel it in his bones. This was their moment, the turning point of the battle. The Deathworlder flagship fired, a colossal burst of energy rippling through space. But Zoreth had anticipated this. The mysterious fleet's coordinated strike found its mark, and the flagship's energy shield flickered. It was enough, just enough for Zoreth's fleet to press the advantage. "Fire everything," Zoreth shouted. His voice was raw, but it carried the weight of command, the weight of everything that depended on this moment. His fleet fired in unison, unleashing a barrage of their own. Laser beams, plasma shots, and missiles filled the void, heading straight for the now vulnerable flagship. The mysterious fleet fired again, this time with devastating accuracy. The Deathworlder flagship shook violently, its shields failing. Explosions burst out from its sides, lighting up the dark void like 1,000 stars. Zoreth watched with grim satisfaction as the flagship's engines flickered, and it began to lose momentum. "Direct hit, Commander," an officer yelled. "The flagship's central reactor is failing. They're going down." Zoreth felt a surge of hope, but he knew better than to relax. The Deathworlders were known for their ability to adapt, to fight until the bitter end. They would not go down without one last desperate attempt to turn the tide in their favor. And sure enough, the Deathworlder flagship wasn't done yet. As it started to list, its remaining fighters launched into a final suicidal charge, and smaller craft began swarming toward Zoreth's fleet. The Deathworlders had deployed everything they could muster in a final, all-or-nothing assault. Zoreth's eyes widened as the swarm of Deathworlder fighters closed in on them. "Brace for impact," Zoreth shouted, his hand slamming onto the armrest of his command chair. "Activate the defensive shields. We can't let them break through." The crew scrambled to execute his orders, but even with all their shields up, the impact of the fighters was felt. Zoreth's heart pounded in his chest as explosions rocked the ship, shaking everyone to their core. The Deathworlder's fighters were like a swarm of locusts, relentless and vicious. "Commander," the communications officer yelled, urgency in their voice. "We have a breach on the lower decks. Shields are down to 40%. The Deathworlder fighters are overwhelming us." Zoreth's jaw clenched. They were on the edge of disaster, but he wouldn't give up. "Redirect all power to the shields," he ordered, his voice firm. "Send a distress signal to the mysterious fleet. We need backup now." He could feel time slipping away, the threat of imminent destruction looming. The Deathworlder fighters were closing in, and it seemed like the battle was slipping through their fingers. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a strange, familiar force entered the fray. The mysterious fleet, their ships sleek and deadly, had arrived just in time. With a synchronized blast, they tore through the last of the Deathworlder fighters. The remaining Deathworlder ships, weakened and scattered, were no match for the combined strength of Zoreth's fleet and their new allies. Zoreth's eyes widened as the battle began to turn in their favor. "Commander, we've won," an officer shouted. "The Deathworlders are retreating. Their flagship is about to go down." Zoreth let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. His fleet had made it through the storm. The Deathworlders had been defeated, and their forces were scattering into the void. But even as victory was within their grasp, Zoreth's mind raced. The mysterious fleet had been their salvation, but what had brought them into the fight? Who were these mysterious allies, and what did they want from them? Zoreth's questions remained unanswered, but one thing was certain. The battle was far from over. He had won this fight, but the greater war was still ahead. A new alliance and unanswered questions. As the echoes of the battle faded into the cold expanse of space, Zoreth stood in the command room, staring at the view screen. The Deathworlder flagship had finally succumbed, a burst of fire and debris marking its fiery end. Across the vast field of destruction, the remaining Deathworlder ships were either destroyed or retreating in disarray, leaving Zoreth's fleet victorious, but with a lingering sense of uncertainty. "Commander," an officer called, breaking the silence. "The mysterious fleet has completed their withdrawal. They're moving away from our sector." Zoreth's eyes narrowed as he observed the ships retreating into the distance. He felt a mix of relief and confusion. They had won the battle, yes, but the mysterious fleet's sudden appearance had left him with too many questions. Who were they? Why had they chosen to intervene? And most importantly, why had they waited until the last possible moment to strike? "Prepare a transmission," Zoreth ordered, turning to his communications officer. "I want to speak with their leader. Now." Within moments, the view screen flickered to life. A new figure appeared, tall with a composed expression, their face partially obscured by a helmet. A voice, calm and deliberate, echoed through the room. "Commander Zoreth, your people have proven themselves worthy allies," the voice said, smooth and unwavering. "We have helped you win this battle, but there is much you do not understand." Zoreth's jaw clenched. The tone of the voice was cold, calculating. "Why did you help us?" he asked bluntly. "What is it that you want from us?" There was a long pause before the figure spoke again. "We wanted to see if you could survive, to test your strength." Zoreth's eyes flared with anger. "Test us? We nearly lost everything. Your ships arrived just in time to stop us from being destroyed. You left us to fight alone until the final hour." The figure's voice remained composed, unaffected by Zoreth's outburst. "You misunderstand. We have been watching you, Commander. We have seen the strength of your people, your fleet. We had to be certain before we offered you our assistance." Zoreth took a deep breath, trying to regain control of his emotions. "And now that you've tested us, what happens next?" "Now," the figure said, "you are part of something greater. Your victory has proven that you have the potential to be a part of the Alliance. An alliance that has been watching over the galaxy, preparing for the inevitable." Zoreth's mind raced. An alliance? With whom? The figure didn't elaborate. Instead, they continued. "There are dangers out there, forces that even the Deathworlders cannot withstand. The war is far from over. What you just faced was but a small part of what's to come. We are offering you the chance to join us. Together, we can fight what lies ahead." Zoreth felt a weight settle in his chest. The battle with the Deathworlders had been brutal, but what this mysterious entity spoke of was something far more terrifying. And what happens if we refuse? The figure paused. Refuse, and you will face destruction on your own. You and your people are not ready for what's to come without help. But choose wisely, Commander. The offer will not wait forever. Zoreth's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. He had seen what his fleet was capable of, the strength and resilience they held. But they had barely survived this encounter. He couldn't deny that the mysterious fleet's assistance had made all the difference. I need time to think, Zoreth finally said. We need to regroup. The figure nodded, and the screen flickered off. Zoreth stood silently for a moment, processing the gravity of the conversation. His crew looked at him, waiting for a decision. He could feel the weight of the universe pressing down on him. His people had fought hard to survive, but now they were being asked to make an impossible choice: join an unknown alliance or face an uncertain future alone. He turned to his officers, all of them sharing the same look of uncertainty. Prepare the fleet for departure, he said quietly. We're not done here yet. We need to understand what we're up against before we make any decisions. As the fleet began to move, Zoreth gazed out into the vastness of space. The battle had been won, but the war was just beginning. And somewhere out there, beyond the stars, a new enemy was waiting, one far more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The Deathworlders had been just the beginning. Zoreth had no doubt that the future of his people depended on the decision he would make in the coming days. Would he join the mysterious alliance and face whatever threats lurked in the dark corners of the galaxy? Or would he chart a different course, relying on the strength of his own people? He didn't know the answer yet, but one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, it would change everything.